Pacific.
Good evening. I'm Margaret Warner. Jim Lehrer is off today. On the NewsHour tonight, the President commemorates Memorial Day at Arlington. Allegations of slavery in Sudan. I'll report on a rescue effort and reaction to it. Beating traffic jams. Seattle has a high-tech solution. And finally, a David Gergen dialogue with historian Stephen Ambrose about the citizen soldiers of World War II. It all follows our summary of the news this Memorial Day.
Brought to you in part by ADM. Feeding the world is the biggest challenge of the new century, which is why ADM promotes satellite technology to help the American farmer be even more productive. ADM, supermarket to the world.
This program is made possible in part by a grant from Travelers Insurance.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you.
There were new accusations of civilian deaths today in the NATO bombing campaign for Kosovo. Yugoslav media reported at least 16 people were killed when bombs struck a sanitarium and retirement home in a city southeast of Belgrade. Serbian television said 10 more people died when NATO attacked an apartment building in another city south of the capital. Kwame Holman has our summary of the day's events.
On this 69th day of the NATO air assault, A-10 tank buster aircraft took advantage of good weather to launch low-level daylight attacks on Serb troops near the Albanian border. But the last 48 hours of newly accelerated attacks brought more reports of NATO-caused civilian loss of life. Serb officials blamed NATO for the deaths at the sanitarium and adjacent retirement home in Surdulica and said other people may be buried in the rubble. And Serb authorities said the NATO missiles that struck the apartment building in Novi Pazar in southwestern Serbia may have been aimed at a printing press and radio and television facilities. On Sunday, a midday bombing felled a bridge in southern Serbia that Yugoslav officials said was crowded with shoppers on foot and in cars. At least 9 were killed, according to Serb media. Also Sunday, NATO bombed a tunnel entrance near Prizren in Kosovo, killing 1 person and injuring other members of a convoy of Western reporters.
Definitely an aerial bombardment. We saw the planes, we heard them flying very low. A couple of seconds later, big explosions.
NATO said the bridge was a valid military target and acknowledged bombing in the areas of 2 of the other incidents. In Brussels today, the reports of new civilian casualties brought this response from NATO spokesman Jamie Shea.
We have been engaged in this because the government in Belgrade has been deliberately targeting large numbers of its own civilian population for months. We have made it clear that we would have preferred to solve this through other means except the use of force. But we are not going to be deterred.
Meanwhile, the Serb news agency confirmed Yugoslav President Slobodan Milosevic's acceptance late last week of the principles of a peace deal offered by the Group of 8 industrial nations. A statement said Yugoslavia would allow peacekeeping forces to enter Kosovo, but it did not indicate whether NATO troops could be part of that force. That is a condition NATO continues to insist on.
No NATO, no go. Why? Because it is to us absolutely crystal clear that if there is not an effective security force in Kosovo, nobody is going to trust that force. No Serb, no Kosovar, nobody.
The Serbs continued to release ethnic Albanian men from prisons in Kosovo. Some 150 arrived in Albania yesterday with tales of torture and beatings at the hands of the Serbs. Another 50 came to Macedonia. This man said he was pulled from a convoy of refugees attempting to flee Kosovo.
I stayed in jail for a month. We were separated from a convoy of people. They beat us. Look how they broke all my teeth. They put my dentures on the ground and they smashed them. They were hitting me on the head and I was bloody. Now I'm an invalid and very sick.
The former prisoners reported thousands more men and children remain in a prison compound near the Kosovo capital of Pristina, surrounded by military equipment parked there by the Serbs.
President Clinton urged Americans this Memorial Day to support the U.S. military campaign over Kosovo, saying it was a, quote, big test of what we believe in. He spoke at Arlington National Cemetery outside Washington. He began the visit by placing a wreath at the Tomb of the Unknowns and observing a moment of silence. He then told a crowd of several thousand that to ignore ethnic slaughter in Kosovo would be to repeat the mistakes of the past. We'll have excerpts from the president's speech later in the program. In Turkey, Kurdish rebel leader Abdullah Öcalan urged judges at his treason trial to spare his life. Speaking from a bulletproof glass cage on the trial's opening day, Öcalan offered the government a deal. He said he will end the armed rebellion by Kurdish separatists if he is spared, but he warned that hundreds of thousands will die if he is not. Öcalan stands accused of leading a 15-year war for Kurdish independence. India agreed today to talk with Pakistan about Kashmir, but said Indian air attacks would continue over the disputed territory. India has conducted 6 days of air and ground assaults on militants in the Indian-controlled part of Kashmir. India contends the guerrillas are funded and directed by Pakistan. Pakistan denies the charge. No date was set for the talks. Back in this country, firefighters struggled to control blazes in 4 states today. In North Florida, flames have scorched some 50,000 acres in the Okefenokee Swamp and spread into Georgia. In Arizona, wind gusts of up to 50 miles an hour have fueled 2 wildfires that have burned more than 24,000 acres. And in California, fires have consumed 13,000 acres at Joshua Tree National Park. Forestry officials say those fires have now been contained. That's it for the news summary tonight. Now it's on to the President's Memorial Day message, slavery in Sudan, outsmarting Seattle's traffic, and a Gergen dialogue about America's citizen soldiers. President Clinton commemorated Memorial Day with a speech at Arlington National Cemetery. Here are excerpts of what he said.
On the eve of a new millennium, we can see clearly how closely the sacrifices of our men and women in uniform in the 20th century are linked to the yearning for freedom that gave birth to our nation over 200 years ago. A yearning based on the then radical premise that we are all inherently equal, fully able to govern ourselves, and endowed with a God-given right to liberty. That is our history, a history that beckons us especially on this Memorial Day, and especially here at Arlington. The most powerful evidence we now have that our country has accepted consistently the old adage that much is expected from those to whom much is given. From Concord to Corregidor, from Korea to Quezon, from Kuwait to Kosovo. Our entire history is written in this ground. Today there is a new challenge before us in Kosovo. It is a very small province and a small country, but it is a big test of what we believe in. Our commitment to leave to our children a world where people are not uprooted and ravaged and slaughtered en masse because of their race, their ethnicity, or their religion. Our fundamental interest in building a lasting peace in an undivided and free Europe, a place which saw 2 world wars when that dream failed in the 20th century. Every morning on Memorial Day, I have a breakfast for leaders of the veterans community at the White House. And I stand there with eager anticipation as people who have fought or whose relatives have fought and often died in our wars come through the line. I noticed them today. There were Irish Americans and Italian Americans. There were Arab Americans and Jewish Americans. There were Catholic Americans and Protestant Americans. There were African Americans. There were Hispanic Americans. There were Asian Americans. Just look around here today at the kinds of people who are wearing the evidence of their service to our country. We are a stronger country because we respect our differences and we are united by our common humanity. Now, we cannot expect everybody to follow our lead, and we haven't gotten it entirely right now. We don't expect everybody to get along all the time. But we can say no to ethnic cleansing. We can say no to mass slaughter of people because of the way they worship God and because of who their parents were. We can say no to that, and we should. It is important that you know that in Kosovo, the world has said no. I know that many Americans believe that this is not our fight. But remember why many of the people are laying in these graves out here. Because of what happened in Europe, and because of what was allowed to go on too long before people intervened. What we are doing today will save lives, including American lives, in the future. And it will give our children a better, safer world to live in. In this military campaign, the United States has borne a large share of the burden, as we must, because we have a greater capacity to bear that burden. But all Americans should know that we have been strongly supported by our European allies, that when the peacekeeping force goes in there, the overwhelming majority of people will be Europeans, and that when the reconstruction begins, the overwhelming amount of investment will be European. This is something we have done together. And I ask you, in the days and nights ahead, to remember our brave pilots and crews flying over Serbia, to keep their families in our thoughts, and in the bright new century ahead, those who live free, with pride in and without fear of their heritage or their faith, will be very grateful to today's men and women in uniform. I thank you all. God bless you, and God bless America.
A civil war has raged for decades in the African country of Sudan. Now the government is being accused of condoning slavery. We start with a report from correspondent Tom Bearden on some elementary school students in Denver who helped draw attention to the issue.
When we write dear whatever, do we write UN or United Nations?
No, I'm going to give you the name. We're going to write it.
It was a very special civics lesson, learning about the world by trying to change it. This group of fourth graders in a suburban Denver school has launched a campaign to free the victims of modern slavery in Africa. Their campaign has already made some big waves, moving their congressman to raise the issue with the Secretary of State, for example.
Madam Secretary, I want to tell you about something I'm very proud of. Over 1,000 of those redeemed slaves have had their freedom purchased by some fourth grade students, believe it or not, in a school in my district, Highline Community School.
Believe me, I know about the terrible human degradation that is taking place in Sudan. I admire those students, and I will write a letter back to them.
Half a world away from the kids' Aurora, Colorado classroom, Africa's largest country has been locked in a bitter civil war for 15 years. The Islamic government in Sudan's north is fighting rebels in the south, most of them Christian or adherents of indigenous tribal religions. While the Sudanese government denies it, most human rights observers say independent militias fighting on behalf of the government have been encouraged to capture slaves during their raids among the Dinka people of southern Sudan. Yet slavery has been only a part of the staggering human cost of the war. Nearly 2 million lives lost, more than 4 million people displaced. The U.S. media have reported all this sporadically, but there hasn't been any sustained attention. Then, a year ago, Barbara Vogel read a small article in a Denver paper about the resurgence of slavery in Sudan.
I brought the article into my class, and I said, I have something I want to read you today. I taught you that slavery was over, and that's what our books had said, but I was wrong, and so were they. They sat as I read that article, and tears were coming down their face. Their mouths were open. And the very first thing that they said is ingrained in my mind. What are we going to do about this?
Vogel's kids responded in two ways. They started writing letters to important people, from the President and the UN Secretary General on down.
You need to write the Secretary, and you need to tell him.
They also started raising money, donating their allowances, selling their toys in the schoolyard.
Where did that dollar come from?
From my tooth.
From your tooth? Did the tooth fairy come last night?
They had seen reports that two Christian organizations were using the controversial tactic of actually buying slaves and setting them free, and they wanted to help. They sent their money to Christian Solidarity International, which converts the donated money into Sudanese currency. Then people like Christian Solidarity's John Eibner make clandestine visits to southern Sudan. He buys slaves from northern Sudanese traders.
200,000, 300,000.
The going rate for a human being is the equivalent of $50 US. The redeemed slaves are then free to return to their villages. The Denver Post did a story about the children's fundraising efforts, which was then picked up by other newspapers and TV networks. Money began to pour in.
We're freeing slaves, and people don't think that kids can make a difference, but we are. I've learned the power of one, and I've learned that even if you're standing alone, you can make a big difference.
How big will that difference be? Vogel's class drew international press attention.
In Japan, your achievements are well received by the Japanese people.
But also criticism. Francis Deng is a former Sudanese diplomat who's now a senior scholar at the Brookings Institution.
I find myself, frankly, in a serious situation of moral dilemma, because to be going to people who are known to be slavers and therefore criminals, whom the world should condemn, to be doing business with those kinds of people, I just find very difficult to accept. On the other hand, I cannot say that freeing children is wrong if they can in fact be freed. And I think if we can make the link so that this business with slavers is only a source of providing evidence that can arouse the conscience of humanity, then it might be a good thing.
Jeff Drumtrop of the U.S. Committee on Refugees thinks that buying slaves may even perpetuate the slave market.
The money that goes into buying back slaves could possibly fuel the slave trade, because this money goes to the same people who are doing the raid, abducting the children, and by buying back the slaves, the question is, are we paying money into a vicious circle that encourages more slave raids?
Vogel says that fear is unfounded.
We have really researched this, and there is no evidence that this purchasing, the freedom, the redemption of women and children is causing any slave market. The price of slaves have not risen. Matter of fact, it's dropped.
America, a country which tore itself apart over the issue of one man owning another, is nothing if not an abolitionist nation. I know.
Tactics aside, Vogel's class continues to find more and more allies in their crusade. They recently participated in a day-long video conference on slavery staged at the Simon Wiesenthal Center in Los Angeles.
500,600.
The audience watched some of the news coverage from Sudan. They also heard from Christian Solidarity's John Eibner.
The time is long overdue for people of goodwill, regardless of creed or color, to raise their voices in protest. The silence of our national leaders has so far been deafening.
A key goal of the teleconference and of the growing movement that children have sparked is simple consciousness raising.
Type your message. All you have to know.
One of the oldest and most prominent American human rights groups, Freedom House, has gotten involved by organizing college students. They hope to spur a nationwide protest movement. Because many of the enslaved Dinkas are Christians, Freedom House has found especially strong interest at Christian schools. Although Freedom House does not help redeem slaves, it held a conference at Georgetown University to hear from England's Baroness Caroline Cox, a member of the House of Lords who has organized her own slave redemption mission.
160,000 Christians have died for their faith each year, our faith each year. Many of those are in Sudan.
Students also attend meetings on how to organize a letter-writing campaign or set up a web page about slavery.
Put the history of Sudan with like a map with like pictures, because pictures really speak like 1,000 words.
On other campuses early this year, some students set up mock slave pens and created newsletters about human rights abuses in Sudan. Freedom House's Nina Shea thinks all this will eventually have an impact.
There's complete silence from our political leaders. It's going to become politically untenable for this silence to go on.
This new abolition movement may be growing, but it also faces a lot of apathy. New Jersey Representative Donald Payne has been trying to get Congress and the administration to focus on the issue for several years. When Vogel's students wrote to him, he responded with a certificate of appreciation and words of encouragement.
For your dedication as little abolitionists to end slavery in Africa.
Payne is pleased by the increased attention, but says it's been a long time coming.
When the anti-apartheid coalition was waging its campaign against South Africa, the protests were loud. The passion was evident. Where is the passion here?
It isn't here. We haven't seen arrests. We haven't seen demonstrations at the embassy of Sudan. I'm hoping now that we will start to see that. I think that once we start to demonstrate, the passion will build because the education of what is happening will become more widespread, and that's when you'll see people start to move forward.
Payne and others have decried the slowness of the world's response. Freedom House's Nina Shea is more specific. She points her finger at human rights groups in particular.
I'm very disappointed in the human rights community as a whole. They've barely uttered a word of protest about this slavery issue. And this is a real slavery where children are being shipped by their freight car loads north to the slave markets.
Jeff Trumpra believes the sheer scale of the misery has made it hard to focus on a single response.
It's not that the human rights organizations are opposed to each other. I think that the issue is how do you get the American public and how do you get the highest levels of the administration focused on this issue for a sustained period of time. For some people, slavery is what will compel them. For others, the idea that 100,000 people died of famine last year. In this day and age, that people died of starvation.
Some civil rights groups have gone on the record opposing slavery in Sudan. Critics think they should be doing more.
It's not a matter of popular democracy when it comes to human rights.
One black leader who has spoken out is Reverend Chuck Singleton of the Loveland Church in California.
Human rights come by demand. Human rights come because somebody resists the powers that be and say it's got to change.
The anti-slavery folks say they've approached some of the black civil rights organizations in this country and they've not been interested in the issue. Is that the case, and if so, why?
I think that's an exaggeration to say they're not interested, but that they haven't responded on a level that we would expect. I think that's accurate to say. Leaders tend to get busy. When they get busy, they become maintenance people. They got to keep going what they got going already. So to call their attention to and to get them to change directions or add another agenda item is a very difficult thing to do.
The kids are singularly unimpressed with the adult arguments over competing agendas.
This is wrong and we need to make it right.
They don't claim to have solutions to problems that have baffled world leaders for years, but they are absolutely convinced that if they continue to speak out, they can make a difference. In fact, awareness campaigns have raised hundreds of thousands of dollars to free slaves. And although the Sudanese government still denies slavery even exists, it has recently established a committee to end what it calls the abductions and forced labor of women and children. As political movements go, this one is very young. It has no national leader, no cohesive tactics, no unified agenda, no 9-point program. It is not yet a mass movement, but it is growing. Some believe it's likely to fade in the face of apathy, but Mrs. Vogel's 4th grade doesn't intend to let that happen.
Phil Ponce explores the subject further in this discussion taped last week.
We get 3 views. El Fatih Edwa is Sudan's ambassador to the United Nations. Olata Otunu, a veteran diplomat and former foreign minister of Uganda, is now the United Nations Special Representative for Children and Armed Conflict. And Philippe Guiton is director of World Vision Sudan, a private relief and aid organization. Mr. Ambassador, we just saw a piece which suggests that there is an active slave trade in your country. For the record, Is there slavery taking place in Sudan?
I would say no slavery as such, and I would like to first of all put on record that I don't question the innocence and the good intention of those children, but I question those who have hidden political agenda behind it and bringing a scam to show to those children. I just would like to put 2 or 3 points that would put things in its own precise logic. First of all, I would say abduction between tribes, be it northern or southerner, among themselves, even southerner against southerner or northerner against southerner. It's a practice that's gone for ages. And the government has worked hard to eradicate it. There is no, all the laws in the government does not condone this, and on the contrary, it punishes it.
And so, if I can interrupt you, interrupt you, Mr. Ambassador, you're saying abductions are taking place, but they do not constitute slavery?
Yeah, I think, yeah, this is what we believe so, because now I am almost approaching my 50th year. I have never seen a slave in my life, in my own country. The second thing I would like also, the most important point is that this is not only part of the civil war that's going on, it's a tribal conflict, because the civil war is a political war, and more than 95% of the displaced people of the South, they go to the North and find refuge there instead of going to the neighboring countries. The third point I would like to put is that all these practices which we have seen, that people buying slaves or freeing slaves, I think this is a scam, because if we address 2 major points, we will know the reality of it. First of all, these people, they have entered Sudan through the rebel-held areas. They have never been into the government areas. We are faced with 2 situations. Either the rebels are participating on this kind of trade, and you cannot imagine that people will go and buy from someone who has thousands of slaves under the controlled, military-controlled rebel area.
Mr. Ambassador, when you say that it's a scam, the video that we saw of a person with the Christian Solidarity International handing over money, are you saying that that is not an accurate portrayal, that is a scam?
I believe it is not accurate, because I challenge them to tell us how did they enter. They entered through the rebel-controlled areas. So if they entered through the rebel-controlled areas, how could you hold the government responsible? Why the rebels allowing such trade to take place in that area?
In other words, that videotape that we saw is not to be believed, in your opinion?
In my opinion, either it is a scam or the rebels are participating in this trade.
Mr. Guiton, what is your reaction? Is there slavery taking place in Sudan?
Yes, I think we can play with the words. Some people are speaking about abduction and then forced labor. To me, when you are taking people, abducting people, taking them away from their place and forcing them to work without any hope of freedom and without salary, I'm calling that slavery. So I think there is still slavery happening in Sudan today.
And Mr. Guiton, what kind of work are the people who are abducted forced to do? They're taken from the south of Sudan to the north of Sudan, typically, and then they're forced to do what?
Well, they are taken when there is a raid, when there is a military action.
When there's a raid?
Yes, when a military action taken place in southern Sudan, or at the border between the north and the south, where the conflict is going on at the moment. Usually the raiders are taking cattle and people with them, mostly women and children, taking them into the north, and where they are forced to work, usually for people in their houses, as free, cheap labor.
They're used as domestic servants, for example?
That's what I heard. Yeah.
Mr. Otunu, in the taped introductory piece, we saw this practice of redeeming the people who've been abducted, paying for their freedom. Is that a good idea?
Slavery is, of course, an abomination, regardless of where it is being practiced and by whom. We absolutely must repudiate that. But having said that, actually buying a person like buying a chattel presents a moral dilemma. Are you not participating in this practice and trade? The point that was made by Francis Deng, and I share his views entirely. But
Francis
also,
Deng, the gentleman who we saw in the introductory piece.
That's right. He's himself actually from the Sudan. But also, are you not fueling and creating the very market that would then make people take slaves in order to have them be redeemed? In a country like Sudan, where so many people are so poor, $1 a day per person, sometimes a day per family, and you bring in $50 at one go, this could create a whole market, a whole condition. So this I find troublesome. But more fundamentally, the real eradication of this practice does not lie in the redemption by financial means. It lies in prosecuting those who are abducting children and women. It lies in ending the conflict, the civil war in Sudan, which creates conditions that fuels this practice. We must not divert our attention from this central task of bringing pressure on the parties concerned not to abduct, to tell them they cannot expect goodwill from the international community, to prosecute those who are found to be guilty, but above all, to bring the parties to the conference table and end the conflict which makes this possible.
Mr. Ambassador, staying with the issue of the payment, is this publicity that your country is getting? Is this putting any pressure on you to address this issue with the formation of this committee last week, for example?
Actually, we find ourselves obliged to address this issue, whether in whatever form it is on, because we, as a responsible government, we do not condone such practices.
Is it embarrassing to your government to have these stories?
Actually, it's not to that such, because the stories itself, as I said, we question the integrity of the stories. As I said, we have problems among the tribes, and this tribal thing is going for years. It's not only among North and South, it's only between the Southerners themselves. And as I said, you cannot go and find someone to buy 1,000 slaves from him, unless this man is guarding these slaves with an army. And this is why I see this story are a little bit exaggerated. Though we confess that there are problems between tribes, happening between Southerners and Southerners, between Northerners and Southerners in those areas and the war zone areas, or even in non-zone areas, it happens between tribes also in the South.
Mr. Guiton, I'd like your reaction to the issue of payment. Is that a good idea, to pay for somebody's freedom?
I think buying the redemption of slaves is not going to help ending slavery and ending this trade, this horrible trade still going on in the 21st century. I think it's part of a solution. At that time, I think we have to focus on what will be the solution to end slavery into Sudan, which is, and I agree with Mr. Otunu, which is to focus on finding peace for Sudan, ending the conflict in Sudan. If the conflict ends in Sudan, we will be able to address the issue efficiently, the issue of slavery.
Some people, though, are saying that you can't wait until there's a political settlement to do something about people who find themselves abducted and forced into mandatory labor. How do you react to that?
I think what should be done is to, I think that's what the government has put in place recently is a good step, actually it's a step in a good direction, to establish a committee with the power to go investigate and take the people who are practicing the slave trade and doing slavery into court and trial them and put them into jail. That may mitigate this effect. I think buying back and introducing money in the slave trade, money from outside the country, is not going to help ending slavery now.
Mr. Otunu, are you optimistic about this special committee that was announced last week to look into the issue of abductions and forced labor?
Well, first of all, I'm very glad that the government of Sudan is recognizing and addressing this issue. But secondly, the composition of the committee is encouraging because it's very broad-based, including members of civil society, including mothers' associations, including people from some of the ethnic groups like the Dinka, who have been among the major victims of this practice. So this is encouraging. But of course, we must wait and see what they do in practice before passing judgment. But in my view, The first line of action is to prosecute those who are responsible under Sudanese law. There should be no impunity. Pressure, political pressure should be brought to bear on all parties in the conflict who are practicing this when there is evidence of abduction of people. But above all, we must mobilize an international movement for peace in the Sudan. We must bring the parties to the conference table and end the conditions of chaos, atrocities, and impunity that makes it possible for this practice to flourish in the Sudan.
Mr. Ambassador, is your government committed to bringing the power of the law to bear on people who are engaged in this practice?
Absolutely, the government is very committed. And coming also to the issue of peace in Sudan, I think this is the first government in Sudan that realized the importance of peace, and it has went to put the real solution, which is self-determination for the southern Sudan. And this self-determination will let the southern people themselves decide whether they accept unity or even separation and having their own state. And I think the last statement by my president, which was said before very recently, that for Sudan, a unity with war, we prefer the peace with separation than unity with war.
Mr. Ambassador, I thank you very much. Mr. Otuno, I thank you. And Mr. Guiton, thank you.
Still to come on the NewsHour tonight, beating Seattle's traffic and a Gergen dialogue on soldiers. There are some new high-tech ways to avoid traffic congestion. Rod Minot of KCTS Seattle reports.
We don't have too many blocking problems, but slow traffic, lots of it.
Richard Gilman may be the commuter of the future. The 51-year-old software consultant uses a small palm-top computer to check on traffic congestion. Before leaving his home, he must choose between one of two major highways that lead into Seattle.
So what's the traffic look like?
Well, looks like 520 is stop and go, but I-90 looks clear into Seattle.
The computer software and wireless modem download color-coded maps from the internet that enable Gilman to pick his route.
Here's a 520, and those black areas mean stop and go.
Black and red indicate heavy traffic. Green means an easy commute. The maps are constantly updated, giving current data on accidents, construction, and road closures.
I like to check the traffic before I leave somewhere because, you know, the traffic around here is pretty tough, and you have a choice of which bridge to take across Lake Washington to get into Seattle, and if there's an accident on one of the bridges, you're way better off taking the other bridge. So if I can check in advance and see if one of them's jammed up, then it saves me a lot of time.
The traffic information is provided by SmartTrek, an $18 million pilot project designed to fight automobile congestion. It's funded by the Department of Transportation's Federal Highway Administration. Kenneth Weichel heads that agency.
As we look to the future, the 21st century, we need to find a new solution so that we do not build more roads. I mean, building our way out of this congestion is not the answer. We think the answer is intelligent transportation systems, and they will be the interstate system for the 21st century.
Seattle's SmartTrek program ties together a vast network of traffic monitoring technology. Much of it was installed by state, local, and federal planners over the past 20 years, with all the elements now packaged together in SmartTrek. It includes radio transmitters on buses, 300 cameras mounted along highways, and 3,000 sensors buried under roads. SmartTrek collects the data, processes it on a central computer, and then makes it available to commuters on the internet. The data can even be transmitted on other high-tech gadgets, including a specially crafted watch.
So this would indicate that at I-5, there's a level 1 incident southbound at Northeast 130th.
Dan Daly designed the computer networking system for SmartTrek and now works at the University of Washington as an associate professor of electrical engineering. He demonstrated how a program called BusView works.
Here we're seeing a picture of the university district map. And as you can see, there's a fairly large number of buses in the U district.
BusView tracks up to 1,000 buses equipped with radio transmitters. The buses are displayed on a map on the internet.
The application itself has a couple friendly features. You can click on a bus and get what we call a progress bar, which allows you to actually see the progress of the bus along its route.
Then, at actual bus stops, commuters find another Smart Trek feature called Transit Watch. TV screens display bus times, letting commuters know if their bus is early, on time, or late, in the same way monitors at airports show scheduled and actual arrivals and departures.
Well, I missed my other bus, and so it's kind of nice to be able to have an idea when the next bus is going to be here, and if it's running on time, or if it's late, or if that one was the one I wanted and it's early.
Well, I find it pretty useful considering I don't carry a watch or bus schedules, so I think it's pretty useful, yeah.
King County Councilwoman Maggie Famia is skeptical. She says she hears something different from other commuters.
What they tell me is they want more buses. They want to see not real time, they want to see real buses coming down the street to pick them up.
Smart Trek also reports traffic over a cable TV channel. It broadcasts maps and live pictures of congestion on freeways. Dan Daly of the University of Washington.
The TV display, the information on the TV display, is updated every 20 seconds. So it's truly real-time information about the highway. This is different than what you might get on a radio traffic report, where the information can be somewhat old because it requires a series of steps to get that information to you.
Private companies are being encouraged to participate in and profit from Smart Trek with innovations of their own.
Traffic.
Traffic 1 message.
One company manufactures a computer that mounts into the dashboard of a car. It's called AutoPC. Using data beamed over FM radio and satellite, it can alert drivers to traffic jams along their route. The system responds to voice commands.
Select.
Intersection State Highway 522 and 68th Avenue Northeast. February 11th, 1999. 10:13 a.m. Incident, slow traffic extent. 1/4 mile duration. 2 hours.
The big question is, will commuters pay for all this? The price tag on the AutoPC is between $1,500 and $2,000 to buy and install. Subscribers then pay another $5 a month for the traffic reports. Tom Shaffnett is with Q Data Network. The company beams the traffic data to AutoPCs. He thinks the public is willing to pay for his service.
The feedback we've been getting from the market is the level we're talking about, $60 a year, is below the threshold of pain, if you will, for people. We think that a lot of people get this traffic service in using our data receivers, and then they will want to have messaging services like email delivery to the AutoPC or to handheld PCs, or they'll want to have alphanumeric paging come onto their PCs and then capture that information. So we think that, you know, the bundle of services is where we'll make money.
Richard Gilman says it's worth $60 a year to receive traffic reports over his palm-top computer.
And if I have some day where I'm going to several places around the county or something like that, it's great, for checking, sometimes, well, I don't think I'm going to leave right now. It looks pretty bad traffic-wise, so.
But David Hodge, a transit expert at the University of Washington, doesn't think technology holds all the answers.
At best, it's going to help us accommodate additional growth, maybe make it no worse than it is now for some number of years, but it's certainly not going to roll it back and make it easier for us.
Instead, Hodge worries high-tech transportation tools used by Smart Trek may actually end up encouraging more drivers on the freeway. Already, Seattle traffic is considered among the worst in the nation. Since 1970, the population around the Seattle metropolitan area has jumped more than 40% to about 3.2 million people. In that time, the number of cars has swelled 60% to 2.8 million vehicles. Across America, it's a similar story. According to the Federal Department of Transportation, traffic has grown 30% in just the past decade. Between now and the year 2008, the number of cars on the nation's roads is expected to increase by 50%. The University of Washington's David Hodge says the money going to Smart Trek would be better spent on public transit or promoting alternative types of commuting, such as carpooling, toll roads, or telecommuting. But he says even that won't have a major impact.
Again, we're talking about single-digit changes typically in the proportion of people doing anything. We're not going to see a reduction in congestion. The question is, how can we cope with growth?
Smart Trek planners remain convinced their program will reduce traffic delays. Similar systems are now being tested in Phoenix, San Antonio and New York City. Other states may soon see their own programs. The Federal Department of Transportation plans to install smart traffic systems in 75 major cities by the year 2006.
Finally, this Memorial Day, we reprise a Gergen dialogue. 2 years ago, David Gergen talked with historian Stephen Ambrose. He had just published what would become a bestseller entitled Citizen Soldiers, the U.S. Army from the Normandy beaches to the Bulge to the surrender of Germany.
Steve, in recent years, this country has twice celebrated the heroics of the men who took the beaches at Normandy in 1944, and appropriate celebrations. But now you come along and say there's a fascinating story about what happened after D-Day in the 11 months until the Germans surrendered.
Well, we got ashore on D-Day, and that was the big thing. It was a very tenuous hold, however, on the beachhead, and now the job was to expand it. It went very slowly because we had not recognized how tough those hedgerows are going to be to clear out of Germans.
What was a hedgerow?
Hedgerow is a mound of earth about 6 feet wide and 4 to 6 feet high with trees and brambles and rose bushes and et cetera growing up it, and it's impenetrable. And it encloses little tiny fields. Now, each one of those little fields was a fortress. And the Germans were in the corners of the field with their machine guns dug in, and they had dug tunnels through the dirt at the base of the hedgerow to sight their Panzerfaust, their anti-tank rockets. Mm-hmm. And so and the Americans had no preparation for this. We hadn't seen the hedgerows in an intelligent sense and hadn't done any training of men on how to fight there, so everything had to be improvised. The use of tanks. Those tanks would get into the hedgerow country and drive up a hedgerow and expose their belly like this, and the German with the Panzerfaust over there would boom into that unarmored belly, and there goes that Sherman tank. Mm-hmm. The solution to this problem came from a kid who had been a mechanic in Boston before the war. Joe Cullen was his name. He was a sergeant in one of the armored divisions. He said, let's take steel rails and weld them to the front of that tank, and they'll dig into that hedgerow, and it won't go belly up, and then those big Chrysler engines are powerful enough that it can go right through the hedgerow, and then at that point, they can start turning that cannon on the corners where the Germans are with their machine guns, and they can start spraying the hedgerow with their 50 cals. And you can work your way forward in that way. Now, Rommel didn't have a suggestion box outside his office door. It's not the way the Germans fight a war. Bradley did. Cullen had that idea on a Monday. By Tuesday afternoon, it had gotten to Bradley, and by Wednesday morning, they were putting those steel rails onto those tanks, and it worked. So that kind of improvisation finally got us through the hedgerows. And at the end of July, the German line broke on the far right at Saint-Lô. They did trap most of the German army in Normandy. A lot of individuals got out, but the Germans were now disorganized. They had lost their unit cohesion, and they left their equipment behind. And so now, from mid-August on, there was no opposition left in France. The Battle of France was over. The Germans were in full retreat, back eastward, with the Allies coming as close behind them as they could.
But they stopped them at the Siegfried Line.
Well, then two things happened. The Germans got back to a prepared defensive position, the Siegfried Line. All kind of fortifications. Hitler loved poured concrete. He thought poured concrete could stop anything. So they got back into prepared positions, and they pulled off what they called the Miracle of the West, the German army did, in getting itself reorganized and coming back together and getting units to take positions in the line. The other thing that happened was that we ran out of gas, literally. The tanks were getting less and less as the line stretched out from the Channel coast, and as more and more Americans and Brits came onto the continent, the supply situation became critical. So we ran out of gas just at the point that the Germans got behind their fortifications, and now a stalemate ensued. In fact, Hitler was gathering reserves and reinforcements and drawing men from the Eastern Front over to the Western Front and preparing for the last great German offensive of the 20th century. And now the Battle of the Bulge was underway. In the first few days of the Battle of the Bulge, the American army, which had become very cocky, was full of hubris and thought of itself as the best army in the world and had the best intelligence in the world, had been badly fooled and had been attacked where the men were spread out far too wide because nobody thought there would be an offensive in the Ardennes. The result was we lost 2 divisions on the first 2 days. Big losses. And the result was there were breakthroughs. And the result was there were German tanks on the loose behind the front lines. And the result was a humiliation for American generals. And the result was a lot of GIs went into POW camps, and a lot of them got killed. So Hitler launched this attack with great initial success, and something close to panic set in on the Allied side. But the real story of the Bulge is, the one that captures everybody's imagination is Bastogne and the 101st Airborne being surrounded there, and rightly so, but it's a bigger story than that. It's an American lieutenant with a platoon over here and an American corporal with a squad over here saying, I ain't gonna retreat no more. We're gonna stand and fight here. And they held up German columns all across the front and threw the German timetable completely out of kilter, and eventually some clear weather arrived. And with clear weather, trucks could move on the roads, planes could fly and hit at the Germans, and it was done, and the Germans were hurled back from the Battle of the Bulge, so that by January of 1945, the end of January, the lines were back to where they had been in September. Then they get to the Rhine River. In March of 1945, the greatest river in Europe, and it looked like it was going to be a very, very tough proposition to get across this river, and any bridgehead over it was going to be pure gold. An American lieutenant named Carl Timmerman spotted the biggest bridge over the Rhine River. It was a railroad bridge, the Ludendorff Bridge. Timmerman saw it, and without hesitating, he took a squad that was a really wonderfully American squad. There was a Polish sergeant and an Irish corporal and a couple of Germans and an Indian in it, and America. And Carl Timmerman, German, of course, German-American, saw that bridge, and he said, let's go. And he led his men across that bridge in one of the greatest actions of the Second World War. Machine gun fire cutting everywhere. They knew the bridge was scheduled to be blown up. They expected it to be blown in their faces. What apparently happened, David, was a stray bullet cut the wire leading out to the demolition charges. Timmerman got across, took the bridge. Now we were over the Rhine, and then it was time for the exploitation and rolling across Germany till we met with the Red Army at the Elbe River in April of 1945.
This is a remarkable story. What did you learn about American character in this story of warfare from D-Day on?
Well, you know, the fathers of the young men who fought World War II had fought World War I, and they had a feeling similar that people of our age have about the young. They're not as tough anymore. They couldn't do what we did. And that was very much the feeling in 1940, 41, 42, and it was certainly Hitler's feeling. Now you take these young Americans, 1943 they graduated high school, 1944 they graduated high school, 18 and 19-year-olds, drafted, given insufficient and inadequate training, not well clothed for the rigors of what they were going to face, sent into the line as individual replacements in a foxhole in Belgium. Now, a foxhole in Belgium in the winter of 1944-45 meant down to 10 below on the Fahrenheit scale at night, about 40 degrees in the daytime. That meant that your foxhole was alternating between 3 and 4 feet of water and ice. It meant your leather, the boots they had were all leather. So the boots froze at night on them. They did not have adequate overcoats. They didn't have adequate sleeping bags. They weren't getting any hot food, and it was dark, starting at about 4:15 in the afternoon, and it didn't get light again until about 8:30 in the morning. And they had to stay up all night, and they couldn't move around, couldn't exercise, couldn't smoke a cigarette, couldn't eat anything, had to be watching always for Germans coming on.
So
now, how did they do this?
How'd they do it?
How did they do this? The strongest motivating factor was their buddies, the unit cohesion, the guys that they had trained with, gone overseas with, fought with. And what was unacceptable to the GI in that foxhole was letting his buddies down. Now, they went into this combat with this fear that they were going to be afraid. Every combat veteran I've ever interviewed tells me his biggest fear on going into combat was that I'm going to be afraid. What every one of them found out was, I'm afraid. Fear is inevitable. It's the natural reaction. The point is you got to learn to control that fear and work with that fear and conquer that fear and act. And these guys were able to do it. And in the end, for me, the GI of World War II was a child of democracy who had grown up knowing the difference between right and wrong. And, you know, I've had a lot of them tell me, Steve, I was 19 years old. I was 20 years old. I had my life ahead of me. I didn't want to live in a world in which Hitler ruled Europe and was threatening the United States. I knew that if I were going to have a good life, we had to win this war, and I had to do my part to see to it. They knew the difference between right and wrong, and they didn't want to live in a world in which wrong prevailed.
Stephen Ambrose. Fascinating story. Fascinating man. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Stephen Ambrose's latest book is called Comrades, Brothers, Fathers, Heroes, Sons, and Pals. Again, the major stories of this Monday. Yugoslav media reported NATO bombs killed 26 civilians in 2 cities south of Belgrade. President Clinton, in a Memorial Day speech, called Kosovo a big test of what we believe in. And federal and state firefighters battle blazes in 4 states. We'll see you online and again here tomorrow evening. I'm Margaret Warner. Thank you and good night.
Brought to you in part by ADM. Feeding the world is the biggest challenge of the new century. ADM is promoting soil conservation so history doesn't repeat itself. ADM, supermarket to the world. And by Solomon Smith Barney.
Could roses eventually cost a dime a dozen? One thing's for sure, opportunities abound. Let's get to work. Solomon Smith Barney.
And by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, and by the annual financial support from viewers like you. Video cassettes of the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer are available from PBS Video. Call 1-800-328-PBS-1.
This is PBS.
Funding for local broadcast of the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer has been provided by viewers like you. And by the following. Safe Corporation. Risk management solutions for a safer and more competitive Oregon. Safe. On the job for Oregon.
Pacific Continental Bank, offering personalized business banking guidance to individuals and companies in Oregon. Pacific Continental.
Next time on POV.
3 strikes and you're out. Yes or no?
2 fathers linked by tragedy
Our daughters were murdered by people that shouldn't have been out there to murder children.
become divided by conscience.
They're leaving the door to the cage open for the animals to come out and get us.
Maybe 3 strikes was not the ultimate answer.
How justice, media, and politics collide on The Legacy.
On OPB, Tuesday at 10.
Next time on Battlefield Vietnam. As the ground war intensifies, air support plays an increasingly vital role, expanding the conflict with bombing raids into North Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. The air war reaches its peak with Operation Rolling Thunder. Next time on Battlefield Vietnam.
On OPB, Thursday at 10:30.
But I'm out on the road again.